So in chapter one, the boy Samuel talked a lot about where he lived and the forest that he lived in. And we found that he was hunting deer and he saw one but didn't shoot because his mind was preoccupied. And we talked about why that might be. So now we're going to read chapter two. Samuel had returned home from the forest the night before and found his parents sipping tea with Isaac, an old man of the forest who stopped by their cabin every few months while he was hunting. This time, though, he had news. He carried information about a fight in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, where militia had fired on and defeated British soldiers. The battle had happened months before, all the way back in April of 1775. Isaac seemed to be made entirely of scraps of old leather and rags. He was bald and wore a ratty cap with patches of fur that had been worn away. He was tall and thin, and for many years had lived in a cabin some 20 miles to the east. He was so much a part of the forest that even his brief visits with Samuel's family caused him discomfort. He decided to move farther into the frontier when a wagon pulled by oxen came into the clearing near his cabin. The family was traveling westward, looking for a piece of land to farm, and had chosen a spot not far from Isaac's place. The family was, Isaac said, a crowd, and I knew it was time to move on, seeing as how I don't do particularly good with crowds of people. As he was talking, as he was taking his leave from the small shack where he had lived, the family had given him the scrap of paper, soft with wear from all the hands it had passed through, so he could share the news with fellow travelers he met on his journey. They told him of other events they had heard of along the way. He tried to remember the details, but admitted that he wasn't much for the conversation. Since there was so much noise from the sprats, as it seemed a dozen of them, my thinker fuzzed up like bad powder, and my recollector might not be all it could be. But I think they said there was another fight at a place called Bunker Hill, and the Patriot militia got whipped there and sent running when they saw the bayonets on the British soldiers' muskets. He sat quietly, sipping the evergreen tea he always carried, a brew made from pine and spruce needles. He swore it cured colds, and he said he preferred it over furriner tea from outside. But thank you, Mrs. The paper he'd handed to Samuel's father, Olin, was a single sheet that had been folded and unfolded so many times it was near to falling apart. It had been printed on crude press with wooden block letters and was smudged and hard to read, but there was a brief description of the fight at Lexington and Concord, and a drawing of figures firing muskets at some other figures that were falling to the ground. As Samuel studied the paper in his father's hands, he thought, everything in my world just got bigger. Two other families, the Clarks and the Overtons, pulled up in wagons. Isaac had spoken to them on his way to Samuel's place, and they wanted to hear what Olin had to say about Isaac's news. Samuel looked around the small cabin on the edge of the woods that was suddenly filled with people, all talking over each other about the meaning of the battles. It seemed that the strong and sturdy log walls no longer protected his family. The loud outside world his parents had escaped by moving to the frontier had found them. Samuel was excited and frightened and overwhelmed all at the same time. "What does it mean?" Ebenezer Clark asked Olin. His face was red and round as an apple because he drank home beer, 3 quarts every morning for breakfast. "It could be local. Just some trouble in Boston," Samuel's father said. "A riot or the like. There's always a chance of rabble-rousing in the cities, and it doesn't seem likely that a group of farmers would try to take on the entire British army." He paused, then added thoughtfully, "England has the most powerful army and navy in the world, and a gaggle of farmers would have to be insane to fight them." Likely or not, this from Lund Harris, a soft-spoken and careful man whose wife Clara sat nursing an infant. "If it happens, we have to think what it means for us out here on the edge." "What does it mean for them?" "If there was a big battle, close, what does it mean for them?" Nobody spoke. Samuel could hear the crackle of the fire in the fireplace. In the homey, safe cabin, the craziness of the information from the east seemed impossible. There was always some measure of violence on the frontier. Marauding savages, thieves, evildoers, men who operated outside the walls of reason. Harshness was to be expected in the wild, but nothing like this. Nothing that challenged the established order, the very rule of the crown, the civilized life that came from English way of living. The very idea of fighting the British was too big to understand, too huge to even contemplate. These settlers had always been loyal to the rules of the land, obedient to the laws of the country that ruled them. Ben Overton stood. He was a tall, thin man whose sleeves never seemed to come to his wrist. He said, "Well, I think we should do nothing but wait and see how the wind blows." And with nods and a few mumbles of affirmation, the rest got up and went back to their own homes. Not a single person in that cabin could have known what was coming, and even if they had seen the future, they would not have been able to imagine the horror. So, the families heard about this fight or the war. They don't know exactly the extent of it. They don't know if it's really big. They don't know if it's just a quarrel. It doesn't make sense to them because they think, gosh, why would people like farmers and colonists fight the British army? Like, surely that doesn't make sense. So they decided to do nothing. Now, he gave us a little bit of insight into what's coming because he said, even if they had seen the future, they would not have been able to imagine the horror. So, what kind of feelings do you have from here on out? That's what I want you to respond to. What kind of feeling do you have about what's going to happen next? The frontier life. This is that little blurb at the end. The only thing that came easy to people of the frontier was land. A single family could own hundreds, even thousands of acres simply by claiming them. If getting the land was easily accomplished, using the land was a different matter. It had to be cleared of trees for farming. Some oaks were 5 or 6 feet in diameter, and each had to be chopped down by an axe, cut into manageable sections and hauled off. Then the stump was dug out of the ground, often with a handmade wood shovel. One stump might take a week or two of hard work, and a piece of land could have tens of dozens of trees. If a family was lucky, they might find a clearing left by beavers, which log off an area and dam a creek to make a lake, rotting out all the stumps. When the trees and the food are gone, the beavers leave. The dam breaks down, the water drains off, and there's a handy clearing left where the lake was. Okay, make sure you respond either on a piece of paper or in Google Classroom to Chapter 2. See you tomorrow.